Hello, I am Crystal Newman, here to talk more about preventing violence against children. As always, on this show we aim to be thought-provoking, and we want you to question how you relate with children. We share powerful personal stories with you, and we talk to experts for their views on violence against children. Today we look at the issue of sexual violence in schools and at home. It is a very sensitive issue, and it can happen to any child at any time. Of these, girls reported experiencing sexual violence more than boys, with almost 50% reporting being touched sexually against their will, and almost 20% being forced to have sex. Sexual violence is also very, very common in schools. That is what we're going to deal with today, and hopefully you will take something away from the show. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
For me, what I know about sexual violence is where a child under 18 years is forced to fall into sexual intercourse by a person above 18 years.
Sexual violence is when a girl or boy is forced into sex, given gifts.
Sexual violence is when a parent tells a person not under 18 years of age to develop bad habits of sex.
Sexual violence is the forcing of a child into sex.
What I know in sexual violence is when child under 18 years is being abused by his rights.
When a girl or a boy is sexually abused from home, at home or school, when he is with other peoples, he's not active. She shows that he have problems at home.
School children drop out of schools, early pregnancy, even a child reproduces another child. You see a child, but you have a baby. Yes. And sometimes it leads to death.
A child who's sexually abused, what I know in girls gets pregnant.
We can prevent sexual violence by avoiding bad touches.
They should avoid those sugar mummies, sugar daddies.
Yes. We stop sexual violence against children to report to the police.
The police should arrest those men who rape girls and those women who force children, young boys, into sex.
Another thing I want to add on is that children, even in our country, community, they should set up strict laws regarding sexual violence.
I advise you not to get gifts from strangers. I advise you not to have gifts from strangers, and I advise you to concentrate on your work.
I advise the children, when any person tells him or her to be tempted into sexual intercourse, he or she should report to any responsible person about that.
Our story tonight is called A Betrayed Trust on Sexual Violence, Teachers to Students. I would really love you to listen to it. It started with a warm smile. It was followed by encouraging comments during class exercises. Even an affectionate hug followed. Such innocent, harmless scenes played out countless times in her life at school each day. But often far more than she had. Those friendly moments masked the first tips by her teacher Med to start pestering her for sexual relations. Little did the young church know the shattering of Mr. Sembi's evil desires towards her. He wanted her to engage in things that only adults should do. Most of teachers are educated professionals who shouldn't dream of crossing the line into sexual conduct with a student. But a small slice of those teachers, they do not respect such boundaries. Their crimes can leave indelible scars on their victims, severely damage families, and cause lasting harm to the children's lives. Unbeknown to her, Rita had enthusiastically embraced Mr. Sembi's encouraging comments about her, only to discover later that it was all a ploy to gain her confidence and engage her in a sexual relationship. He had gone to great lengths to pretend that Rita was a star pupil, but his real aim was to take advantage of her. More than a year before, he wanted to steal her virginity and rob her of the right to enjoy her childhood. Mr. Sembi had figured out how to make the pretty, innocent girl in class feel so special. It started one day not after she had entered Kampala Hill Memorial Primary School in the outskirts of Kampala City. The teacher, then in his late 20s, was teaching art to his class. When several students presented him the art pieces to look at, he said that Rita's was the only one he could grant the privilege of being called an artist. Can you imagine? He told me I was the only person he could always look at as a future artist. Recalled Rita, who is now 17. She in turn felt a very special girl. Thereafter, Rita became the envy of all the other girls in class. The boys even teased her that Mr. Sembi had swept her off her feet. Can you imagine? The classmates even started to spread rumors that they had seen Mr. Sembi kissing her while they held each other tight. It was hard for Rita to fathom why Mr. Sembi wanted to have a sexual relationship beyond the friendly relationship a teacher should have with his student. I wish it was a different teacher, because I really liked him for giving me encouragement, she said. He was definitely the most appealing teacher in the whole school. He always spoke nicely to me. He was smart, he was gentle. Rita did not even ever imagine school would be the romantic setting for a love relationship, moreover between an adult and a child. The teenager said, I'm only a little girl. Hearing rumors from other girls and boys that I was in love with a teacher, it caused me constant headache. That my teacher had kissed me, that was repulsive. I was terribly embarrassed and just wanted the ground to open up and swallow me. I'm just a girl who came to this school only to get a good education. Rita vehemently denied to the other girls and boys that they were romantically involved with the teacher. He is my teacher, but I have never had a relationship with him. She told the students that it is wrong and inappropriate. I think this is all a big misunderstanding, she said. You see, it is not a simple situation to be in for a child to be subject of inappropriate sexual attention from a teacher. It is not easy to distinguish between an encouraging teacher and someone who is pushing the boundaries of acceptable behavior, as Rita found out. Mr. Sembi was a sexual predator. Yes, who worked hard to groom Rita so that he could take advantage of her. To escape the clutches of Mr. Sembi that was set so close to her, Rita hatched a plan to thwart Mr. Sembi. She enlisted the help of all her fellow students and friends to make it very impossible for any interaction between her and the teacher. Whenever he would call for her after school, other pupils would also make sure that they are around in order to scupper his plans. While this was working for her, Rita also learned to behave in a way as if she really disliked that teacher. After trying so many times to lure Rita into his trap and failing, Mr. Sembi eventually realized that it was tomfoolery to try anymore. He had to give up. The pupils were quite cheeky, and they never lost any sleep in making it known to him that they were actually aware that he was flirting with his own student. He knew he would lose his job. Besides being expelled from the teaching profession, he abandoned all his plans of having an affair with Rita. Credit to all the boys and the girls, all the pupils, for making Mr. Sembi feel very uncomfortable, because they really showed him that they knew what he wanted to engage in with the student was very unprofessional, illegal and immoral conduct with a fellow pupil. He gave up his evil intentions, much to the relief of Rita and all her friends. Thank you very much.
Today I'm with Fiona Kaberinde, a psychosocial support officer at Hope After Rape. You're very welcome to the show.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you for joining us and sharing your experience with us. Now, you deal with children who have gone through sexual violence, I believe.
Yes, we do.
That is a very sensitive issue.
Very sensitive indeed.
I think it's probably one of the worst violations that any child can go through.
Yeah. Yeah, because children are at a stage of development, and children are people we refer to, those are the ones we refer to as those ones who are below 18 years. And at that stage, they're not able to make informed decisions, and they're still at a stage of being modeled, their minds, their body, and everything around them. Their experience is so young, and at that time, they need the best out of life. They're still building trust, building character, and building their values. So when they get to a level where they skip a stage and they are taken into the adult world and they're exposed to sexual violence, it damages them very, very much. So when a child is exposed to such violence, in whatever form, and whether they agreed to participate or did not agree to participate, it is all sexual violence.
Sexual violence is probably one of the worst forms of violence against children.
Yeah, actually it is. When children are exposed to sexual violence in particular, it damages their process of development. Children at that level are trying to develop their character, their values, and their trust for the environment around them. So when a child is exposed, whether with or without consent, it still remains sexual violence. And even when it does not involve touching a child's body, it goes further than that. Even undressing in front of a child for your own gratitude is sexual violence for a child. Involving a child in watching a pornographic film is sexual violence. And even them listening to language that is related to a sexual act is sexual violence against children. And sometimes it is unfortunate that children are even exposed to the sexual act of their parents. Much as they are their parents, it is also sexual violence. So it is a broad aspect that we actually need to protect our children from, because it has both long-term and short-term effects on the children that are growing up. And in their adulthood, you find that these are children who will be violent, both physically and sexually violent at the same time. And sometimes they also have effects that will not stop only at the short-term level, but also go on into their adulthood. And this also goes into both their behavior and their psychological state as they grow up into adults also. So it is really a wide aspect, and it has very, very hard impact on them.
Now, there's something you talked about that, you know, when they get older, they can grow up to be violent, both physically and sexually.
Yes.
And some of the research I have read in the past normally states that adults who are sexually abusive normally were sexually abused when they were children as well.
Yes, if the matter was not handled properly, it goes on into your adulthood. The challenge we have currently is the people around us do not actually provide an environment for children to communicate what is happening in their lives. And communication is a very vital avenue for a child to open up and start sharing things that are happening in their lives. We have a challenge that our parents these days work and they come back very late. So the opportunities for the children to communicate exactly what happened during the day is limited. And even that time, the limited time they have maybe over the festive holidays that are actually the only opportunities the children will have to communicate with their parents, our communication channels are not that open. And a child will not feel very free to even share those details because they don't even communicate about what happens at school and what they watched on TV and all that.
Yes.
So when it comes to such a sensitive issue, a child will not find it easy to open up and share it. And even sometimes when they try to step out and try to say it, the parents usually feel they're interrupting in the adult's conversation and they keep telling them, "Can you shut up? I am talking to a visitor." You know, and yet that is the time a child maybe has gained the courage to say something. So when our communication channels have what are called cobwebs, finding out what is happening in a child's life may not be very easy. Yeah. So a child will keep it to themselves, and even when they become teenagers, they'll keep fighting it. And then the effects will start coming out. Usually, this happens mostly among the girls. The boys are also sexually abused,
Yes.
but the girls will sometimes be promiscuous. And they will say, nobody will understand her because nobody knows the background why she's doing it. And then people will just say the parents have not done enough, she's crazy, she's failing to cope with her teenage, or she's spoiled and all that. They'll say all that, but she will not also understand the reason why she's going through it. And then the whole world is against her. She will not get support from the family, she will not get support from anybody around her. So, and when she's at school, it even gets worse. Because the peers is all she has, and they're also just as inexperienced as she is. So whatever they'll say is where she'll run to, because maybe they'll support her, but support her the wrong way. And they'll just tell her, just move on. It's just the way to go. And you know, when you're still going through that trauma, the more you get involved into the act, you ironically get that satisfaction because the trauma was not handled at the right stage when you experienced the abuse. Yeah. So it becomes a very confusing state because children are not listened to and sometimes they're not even believed, especially when the person they say is abusing them is somebody you trust.
Because either a family member
it's
or
a family member. It's unfortunately, yes, and unfortunately these days even our fathers, yes, are doing it. So nobody will actually take it in, and they'll live in denial, and actually they'll end up pointing fingers at the child. This child is a liar. She's just trying to beg for attention and all that. And when it comes to sexual violence in the schools, you know, a teacher is always looked at center of authority. And you know the teacher is always right, and when the teacher is always right, you do exactly what the teacher has said. And worse still, usually the abusers will threaten. And they'll threaten you about chasing you out of school, not having good grades, and they will still say that you are the bad one. So when you are subjected to having perfect discipline at home, you say the teacher says he will have me expelled. Then when I go back home, what will I explain? So you just fit into the teacher's threats and not talk about it, and the child just goes through school just like that. And when the child maybe decides to resent school, then the cane comes in. I'm paying school fees here. What do you think you're doing? I'm struggling to get you fees, and you can't say you don't want to go to school. Then the child maybe will start communicating, can I change school? Can I do this and that? All the parents will say, who has that money to change school? It's the middle of the year, it's the middle of the term. And you know, without actually taking time to wonder
find out what's going on.
What's going on? Why does this child all of a sudden say, I want to change school? So it takes communication with our children, effective communication with our children, to find out exactly what is taking place in their lives, so that it can be handled, and then the effects do not go on into their adulthood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on the show. It is a very sensitive issue, and I think you've given us some guidelines on how to deal with it. And thank you for all the good work that you're doing with Hope After Rape.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
We have talked about sexual violence against children today. It's a very sensitive issue, and it can happen to a child, anytime, anywhere. It is something that might have happened to you when you were a child. And even if you're an adult, it's not too late for you to seek help. It's not too late for you to actually deal with the problem, because it might affect the way that you relate to children today. Sexual violence is something that is happening in schools, and we need to remember that sometimes the culprits are people that we know, people that we trust, people that we even love. So we need to watch out for these warning signs, watch out for these warning signals. Let's protect the children in our lives. Remember that it is everyone's right to enjoy a violence-free childhood. Thank you for being a part of the show today. Till next time, bye-bye.